Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use Gradle as your building system for your native Android application. And what Gradle is it's a more modern substitute to Apache Ant. It uses Maven repositories to better handle dependencies. And overall, it's a more convenient way to develop native Android applications. So to start things off, we're going to assume already that you have installed the Android SDK and installed all of the API versions necessary. So the first thing that you want to do is in your terminal, let's go ahead and we're going to run the following. Again, we're assuming that you have everything configured already at this point. So we're going to run Android create project. We're going to give it an activity name. We're going to call it main activity. So main activity. We're going to go ahead and give it a package name. So we're going to say com Android test project. We're going to go ahead and give it a target. Let's say Android version 19. We're going to tell it to do it right on our desktop in a directory called test project. And then finally, this is where things start to get a little different than your regular creating Android using Ant from the terminal, like you might have seen in one of my earlier tutorials. This time you're going to say hyphen hyphen Gradle, and then hyphen hyphen Gradle version, in which case the version is currently 0.11, and then you can do a plus. It'll get whatever the most recent minor version is. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And it'll go ahead and create it right on the desktop. See, test project. And it'll go ahead and structure it appropriate to Gradle. So if you're familiar with the Ant structure, but not familiar with Gradle, it is pretty different. So it's going to create a test folder, so that way all of your unit tests and any of the tests that you plan on doing will show up in there. And then you can follow it down the line to find your manifest and any source and resource files. So let's go ahead and crack open the project using our text editor here. Let's say test project open. And for the next thing that we want to do is we want to open up the build.gradle file. So this is where all the magic happens in terms of any kind of custom configurations. So for example, let's say that we wanted to add a Java library to our project. And that's common when developing Android applications. So in order to add an Android library to our project, what we would do is the following. We would go pick a spot in our build.gradle file, and we would add this. Repositories, and then we would type Maven Central, and then we would add dependencies. Just making sure I spelled it correct. I think that's how you spell it. If not, it'll yell at us. So we want to go ahead and add compile. And then we want to go ahead and take the package name that's in Maven Central, which is an actual website that you can actually browse and see what's available. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to add a floating action bar library, which is it's a GitHub project that I found online and used in a few of my projects. So we're going to say com.shamanland, and then we're going to say fab 0.0.8, and what that'll do is it'll download any jar file and just add it to our compile time. All right. So with that added, let's go ahead and test and see where we're at right now. Going back into our terminal, let's go ahead and clear it. Navigate into test project, and we're going to go ahead and build this project by doing Gradle W assemble. Let's see what happens here. It failed. So the minimum SDK cannot be smaller than 1. So let's go ahead and see how we fix that. So what you could do is you could go in and do the old method of finding your Android manifest and adding specific versions in here, or you can do it a little bit more modern and do the following. We can add default config, and note that I'm inside of the Android object here. So default config, and in here we're going to say min SDK version, and we're going to say, let's just go ahead and use 9 as our minimum. And we're going to say target SDK version, and we're going to go ahead and say 19, because that'll match what we have up here. So let's go ahead and save that, and we're going to go ahead and try to assemble it again. And this time you can see that it was successful. So another thing to note that you're probably asking questions on, so why did I add a repositories and dependencies down here when I've already got it inside the build script? The easy answer is they are not the same thing. Don't try to add custom libraries inside of the build script. It's definitely not what you want. Just go ahead and add it outside, and it'll start to work out. So the next thing that we want to take a look at is, how do we build a release version? Because we're already pretty familiar with building a debug version. We just built a debug version of the application, which can be found if we're at the root of our project, build, outputs, APK, and then you'll notice that I have a test project -debug APK, similar to what we saw if we were using Apache Ant. So to go ahead and do the release builds, let's first go ahead and create a new key store because we do need to be able to sign our applications for the App Store. So let's go ahead and do the following. And again, if you've been following my other tutorials, this information is available there as well. So let's go ahead and say key tool, gen key, the key store. And then we're going to give the key store a name, so let's say, let's go ahead and just say signing.keystore. We're going to give it an alias. And for the alias, let's call it signing, I guess. Doesn't really matter. Then we're going to give it a key algorithm, in which case we're going to go ahead and use RSA, because that's a pretty strong algorithm nowadays, and it's required by Android. We're going to say key size equals 2048, and then finally the validity. Did I spell validity? No, I didn't spell validity right. Alright, so validity, and we're going to give it some outrageously long number, and that's number of days this key is valid. And 10,000, that's quite a bit. So let's go ahead and hit enter. Let's go ahead and enter a password. I'm going to say 1234 is my password. I suggest, it has to be 6 characters. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, you probably want to use a stronger password when you make it for real. Let's say Nick Boy. Let's say software engineering. Let's call it Nick Boy as my organization. Merced, California, US. Everything looks good, so I'm going to type in yes. If you want to enter a different password, you can. I'm just going to leave it as the same password and hit enter. Alright, so if we go into the root of our project here, you can see a signing key store was used. Now what we want to do is we want to actually add it to the Gradle file, so that way it gets picked up. And this is a little more complex than dealing with Ant, so brace yourself for a little bit, I guess you could say. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go into the build types section of the build.gradle file, and we want to add a new line right underneath ProGuard. And we're going to say signing config, and we're going to go ahead and you'll see what I'm going to do in a second here. So we're going to say signing configs, and you can use any name you want for that as long as it's consistent for the next step. The next step being this. So right above build types, let's go ahead and say signing configs to match what we have down here. So signing configs, and then so there's a release because it's an object, so you have to treat it as such. Because we're in the release node. Excuse my indenting and use of spaces. I know that it's not the prettiest, but you should get the idea. So inside of release, what you want to do is you want to type store file and file, and we're going to go ahead and give it the name of the key store being signing dot key store. And then for store password, we're going to say empty string. For key alias, we're going to type in the alias name, which I believe we left as signing. If not, it'll probably yell at us in a minute. And then for key password, we want to go ahead and leave that blank too. And I know we actually created a password, but leaving this blank doesn't really have anything to do with it because we're going to do an extra step. So before we do that extra step, let me say that if you want to leave your password inside these empty strings, you can, and it will not ask you for a password when you make a release build. But I don't want to leave my passwords inside a plain text file because I put mine on GitHub, and if it's on GitHub and there's plain text passwords, that's all kinds of bad. So instead what we want is we want the user who is compiling the project to have to enter a password. So let's go ahead and do the following. Right above Android, what we want to do is we want to say Gradle.taskGraph.whenReady, and then we're going to say task graph. Alright, so in here we're going to do a little bit of logic. So if task graph dot has task, and these are tasks related to the Gradle build process. So has task, we're going to do colon assemble release. So now whenever someone types in assemble release, it's going to run this logic. And this logic being android.signingconfigs.release, which of course we have just created. We're going to say dot store password equals new string system.console.read password, so that way it doesn't expose it as you're typing it in. And we are going to type in some pretty generic text here. We're going to say it's going to show up on a new line. We're going to say enter key store password. Alright, so the same thing is going to happen for the next item. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this so that way it saves me some typing time. And let's go ahead and say this one isn't store password but instead key password. And we're going to say enter key password. Alright, so at this point we should be good to go in theory. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Before we do anything else, let's go ahead and do a standard assemble here to make sure that nothing of our debug has gotten messed up in this process. And oh yeah, that's right. So assemble will actually try to assemble both. So let's go ahead and what we want to do is now instead of assemble, we want to do Gradle W assemble test. Should be it. No. So the error was actually happening because I was typing in the wrong command. So you saw me type in Gradle W assemble test. That is not the correct command, and that's my mistake. So what we want to be using now, since we now have a development build as well as our release build in the mix, we want to use either assemble debug or assemble release. So release will ask for our signing key, and then let's test out debug, which should not. So as you can see, it did not ask for a signing key. So let's go ahead and clear our terminal here. And we're going to go ahead and try out release. So it's asking for our password, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then it's the same password for your key. Alright, so it says it built it. So let's go to build, outputs, APK. And as you can see, it made a release build for us. So it's not too much different than Apache Ant to get things done. It may seem more complicated at first, but if you put some time into learning how Gradle works, it is definitely more convenient than Apache Ant when it comes to Android development, at least. I'm sure Apache Ant still has plenty of good uses elsewhere, but for Android, Gradle is definitely the way to go for now.